I knocked the cup from the queen's hand the instant before it touched her lips, and for the length of one held breath, the whole of the hall of Harrogate believed I had gone mad. You must understand what that hall looked like in the second I moved. 600 guests beneath the great vaulted ceiling of Harrogate Palace, the long table dressed in white and gold for the founding feast of the Kingdom of Eldermoor, the candlelight catching on every ring and every glass until the whole room seemed to be made of small fires. Queen Saralyn stood at the center of it in pale gray silk, her hand lifted, the founder's cup raised toward her mouth, her lips already parting to honor 400 years of the House of Harrogate. And I, Corwin Vael, a king's guard of the third company, stationed 2 paces behind her right shoulder, where a guardsman is meant to be a piece of furniture that breathes. I lunged forward out of my stillness and struck the cup aside. It rang against the marble. Wine the color of a deep bruise sprayed across the cloth, across the gold plate, across the hem of the queen's gown. The cup itself, an old thing of hammered silver that had touched the lips of every monarch of Eldermoor since the founding, spun on the stone and came to rest near the table leg, empty. And then the silence, not a polite silence, the kind that has a temperature to it that you can feel pressing on the back of your neck, 600 faces turning, the musicians scraping to a halt. A goblet somewhere falling, and not even that drawing an eye, because every eye in that hall was on me, on the guard who had just assaulted the cup of the Queen of Eldermoor at the most sacred moment of her reign, in front of the assembled lords, the foreign envoys, the cameras of the realm broadcasting it all to 10 million homes. I want to tell you that I was calm. I have worn this red tunic for 11 years, and I have trained my face into a wall, and the wall held. But my heart was going like a war drum, because in that frozen instant I understood 2 things at once. The first was that I had been right. I knew it the way you know a step is missing in the dark, a certainty in the body before the mind can argue. The second was that if I were wrong, if I had truly only imagined the thing I thought I'd seen, my life as I knew it was already over. They would take the rifle from my hands tonight. There would be no trial worth the name. A guardsman does not touch the queen. A guardsman does not move. Prince Consort Aldrich was the first to break. He came up out of his chair to my left, a big calm man not given to sudden things, and his face had gone white around the mouth. "Vael," he said, and his voice cracked on the single word. Down the table I saw the captain of my own company, Halden Rowe, already moving, 2 guardsmen at his back, their faces stone but their eyes telling me everything, telling me I was finished. The queen did not move. That is the thing I remember most clearly of all of it, more than the wine, more than the sound the cup made on the marble. Queen Saralyn did not flinch and did not scream and did not pull her hand to her chest the way a startled person does. She stood exactly as she had been standing, her now empty hand still half raised, and she looked at me, not at the wreckage of the toast, not at the captain coming for me. At me, into my face, with those gray eyes that had read 1,000 petitioners and 100 liars across this same table. And I watched her do in 1 second what it would take the rest of that hall an hour to do. I watched her decide to trust me. "Hold," she said. She did not raise her voice. She never did. But the word went down the length of that hall like a blade drawn slow, and Captain Rowe stopped where he stood with his hand already reaching for my collar, and the 2 guardsmen behind him stopped, and 600 people who had been one breath from a roar held that breath instead. "Captain Rowe," the queen said, still looking at me, "you will not touch my guardsman until I have heard him." And then to me, lower, almost gentle, the way you might speak to a horse that has bolted for a reason you don't yet understand. "Corwin Vael, you have served at my back for 6 years, and you have never so much as turned your head without an order. So you will tell me now, in front of all of these people, before I let them take you. Why did you strike the cup from my hand?" There are moments a man rehearses his whole life without knowing he is rehearsing them. Every cold dawn on the forecourt, every numb hour standing a post while my legs screamed and my mind drifted and snapped back. every drill where Sergeant Maddox had bellowed that a guard's whole worth was in the half-second between seeing and knowing. All of it, I understand now, had been preparing me for the answer I had to give in that hall with the wine still spreading across the cloth. "Because it was poisoned, Your Majesty," I said, "and I can prove it before you finish asking me to." I heard the words land. I heard the hall take them. Somewhere a woman gasped, and somewhere a man laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, the laugh of someone who needs it not to be true. Aldrich's hand had found the back of his chair and was gripping it white. And the Queen held my eyes one moment longer, and I saw the question behind them, the only question that mattered. Not is he telling the truth, but how could he possibly know? That is the part that stunned the court. Not that the cup was poisoned, though God knows that was a horror that would not finish unfolding for 3 more days. It was how I knew. It was the reason I had moved. And to make you understand the reason, I have to take you back from that ringing hall, back past the wine and the held breath, to a thing that began 11 days earlier with a child's drawing, and a question no one else had thought to ask. But first let me finish the moment, because it deserves finishing. The Queen turned from me at last. She looked down the table to where the cup lay against the table leg, and she looked at the dark stain soaking into 400 years of white linen, and then she lifted her gray eyes to the man who had poured for her that night, the steward of the cellar, Brannon Teague, a soft round man with a chain of office on his chest, who had carried the founder's cup to her side himself, as he had at every great feast for 19 years. Brannon Teague was not looking at the Queen. He was not looking at the spilled wine. He was looking at the door at the far end of the hall, and his hand had gone to the chain at his throat, and his face had the gray, sliding look of a man who has just watched the floor of his whole life give way beneath him. "Close the doors," the Queen said. And the great doors of the hall of Harrogate boomed shut. 11 days before the founding feast, I was not thinking about poison. I was thinking about a drawing of a horse. I should explain what kind of guardsman I am, because it matters to everything that followed. There are men in the 3rd Company who are better marksmen than I am, and men who are stronger, and men with prettier records. What I have, the only thing I have ever truly had, is that I notice. My mother used to say I was born watching, that as an infant I would lie in the cradle and follow a moth across the ceiling until it was gone, and I have never stopped. On post, when other guardsmen let the long hours of stillness empty their minds, mine fills. I count the gardeners and know when there is one too many. I learn the gait of every footman so that a stranger in a borrowed coat reads to me like a wrong note in a familiar song. It is not a gift that wins medals. You cannot pin "he noticed" to a man's chest. But it is what I am for, and I have made peace with that. 6 years ago I was assigned to the Queen's near guard, the 4 men who stand closest to the body of the sovereign, and in those 6 years I came to know the small daily geography of the royal family the way a shepherd knows his hills. I knew that Prince Consort Aldrich took his coffee black and bitter, and that he pretended otherwise to the cook, because the cook was proud. I knew that the Queen woke before her household and walked the east colonnade alone in the gray light, and that she had given a standing order that no guard was to follow her there, which meant of course that one of us always did at a distance, and she knew it and let it be. And I knew the children. Princess Malin was 8 years old that spring, a small fierce creature with her mother's gray eyes, and a way of going very still and watchful that the courtiers found unsettling, and that I, of all people, recognized. She watched too. And Prince Joran was 10, a boy made entirely of motion, who could not pass a guardsman on post without trying to make him laugh, and who had not yet, in 3 years of trying, made me so much as twitch, which he took, rightly, as the great challenge of his young life. It was Malin and the drawing of the horse that started all of it, though none of us knew it then. I was on the morning post outside the family's private wing when she came out into the gallery in her nightgown, barefoot on the cold stone, a sheet of paper clutched in both hands. She should have had a nurse with her. She did not. She marched up to me and held the paper up, and on it was a horse drawn in the wild, overconfident hand of a child, all mane and motion, and beneath it in careful letters a name, Sugar. "This is Sugar," she informed me. "Mr. Teague's pony lets me feed her, but the new man says I'm not allowed in the lower cellar anymore." Now you will think this is nothing. A child, a pony, a cellar, and I might have thought so too, except for two words. The new man. There was no new man in the household that I knew of, and I knew of every man in the household. The cellar staff under Bran and Teague had been the same 6 faces for years. I had memorized them the way I memorize everyone, because that is the post I keep inside my own skull, whether I am ordered to or not. "What new man, Highness?" I asked her. "A guardsman is not supposed to converse on post. I broke the rule. I have broken it for both those children more times than I can count, and I have never once regretted it." Malin frowned, the deep frown of a child being made to explain the obvious. "The thin one. He has a key on a green ribbon. He told me the lower cellar is closed for the founding, and I'm not to come down and not to tell because it's a surprise for Mama." She looked up at me with those gray eyes. "But you keep secrets all the time, so I'm telling you instead. Is it a good surprise?" I told her I was sure it was. I told her to go back to bed before her feet froze. And I stood my post for 3 more hours with that drawing of a horse sitting in my mind like a stone in a boot. Because a thin man with a green-ribboned key whom no one had hired had told the Princess of Eldermoor not to come down to the cellar, and not to tell, and I could not make those pieces lie flat. That afternoon, off duty, I did a thing I was not ordered to do and had no right to do. I went down to the lower cellar myself. Bran and Teague met me at the bottom of the stair, and I had never seen him meet anyone there before. He was the steward of the cellar. The cellar was his kingdom. He did not stand guard at its door. But there he was, soft and round and smiling, with that smile that did not reach his eyes, and behind him the great vaulted dimness of the cellar where 400 years of Eldermoor's wine slept in the dark. "Guardsman Vael," he said, "you're far from your post." Stretching my legs, "Steward," I said, "I hear there's to be a fine vintage opened for the founding." "The Founder's Reserve," he said, and his smile widened, and his eyes did a thing I have seen liars' eyes do. They went to the door behind him and came back, a flick, a flinch, the eyes checking on the very thing the mouth is trying to keep hidden. "Laid down at the founding itself. The Queen will pour from it. A great honor." "Who's your new man?" I asked. "Thin fellow, green ribbon on his keys." And there it was again. The flick of the eyes to the door, the smile holding by force. "No new men down here, Vael," Bran and Teague said. "Just me and mine, same as always. The little princess has a lively imagination, hasn't she? Always down here pestering my staff." He had not been told the princess had said anything. I had not mentioned her, and he had told me without my asking exactly who he was afraid had talked. I thanked him. I climbed the stair. And by the time I reached the top, the thing in my chest that I do not have a better word for than a guardsman's flinch, the old, animal certainty that something is wrong in the den, had hold of me and would not let go. The trouble with being the man who notices is that noticing is not proof, and a guardsman who comes to his captain with a feeling is a guardsman who is told to stand his post and keep his feelings to himself. I went to Captain Haldon Rowe that same evening. He is a fair man and a hard one, and he has known me 11 years, and he heard me out at his desk with his hands folded and his face giving nothing. I told him about the new man with the green ribbon. I told him about Teague meeting me at the stair and naming the princess before I had. I told him the Founder's Reserve was to be poured for the Queen at the feast, and that I did not like the smell of any of it. "You don't like the smell of it," Captain Rowe repeated. "Vael, listen to yourself. A steward is nervous before the largest feast of his life, with the whole realm watching and the Queen drinking from a cup his grandfather's grandfather polished. Of course he's jumpy. And a hired man you don't recognize, Vael, the palace takes on 40 extra hands for the founding. 40. Kitchen, scullery, hall, stables. You cannot have memorized all of them. No man could. I memorized all of them, I said. There is no thin man with a green ribboned cellar key on the rolls. I checked the rolls before I came to you. That gave him pause. I saw it. But a captain has 600 guests arriving and 1,000 things that are certainly wrong to attend to, and he could not spend the realm's last clear days before the feast chasing a guardsman certainly. I'll have the steward's hires reviewed, he said at last. Quietly. That's what I can give you. If there's a man down there who shouldn't be, we'll find him on paper and we'll pull him without a fuss. But Vael, and here he leaned forward and his voice was not unkind, you will not go down to that cellar again. You will not question Teague again. You will stand your post, you will guard the Queen's body as you are sworn to do, and you will leave the cellar rolls to me. Are we clear? We were clear. I saluted, and I obeyed him in every particular but one, which I will come to, and which I am not sorry for. The paper review found nothing. Of course it found nothing. I understood within 2 days that whoever had put the thin man in that cellar had not bothered to put him on a roll, because a man who means to murder a queen does not first apply to the household office in triplicate. The absence of the man from the rolls, which to Captain Rowe was proof there was no man, was to me proof of exactly the opposite, that the man was there, and had been hidden well. We were looking at the same fact and reading it backward from one another, and there is no argument that closes that gap. There is only what happens next. What happened next was that the thin man saw me. It was 4 days before the feast. I was crossing the lower courtyard at dusk, off duty in a plain coat, and I saw him on the far side by the cellar door, thin, stooped, a ring of keys at his belt, and on the ring a flash of green. He was talking with Bran and Teague, their heads close, and as I came across the cobbles Teague's eyes found me and his whole body changed, and the thin man turned. I have looked into a great many faces in 11 years on the Queen's posts. I have seen drunk faces and furious faces, and the slack, stunned faces of men being arrested. I had never until that dusk seen a face do what this one did. It did nothing. It simply turned to me and considered me, the way you would consider a chair you were deciding whether to move, and there was in it such a complete and tidy absence of feeling that the hair rose on my arms. Teague was afraid. I had read fear on him like print. The thin man was not afraid of anything. He looked at me for the length of 3 heartbeats, and then he smiled a small, courteous smile, and he turned back to his keys, and that was all. But I knew, walking away with my back to him, and every nerve in my body lit up like the founding bonfire, that he had filed me, that I was now a thing on his list, and that the calm of him meant he had done this kind of work before, and well. I did not sleep much those last 4 nights. I told myself the captain had it in hand. I told myself the household was thick with guards, and that no poisoner could touch the Queen through such a screen. And then on the 3rd of those nights, the thing happened that took the floor out from under all my telling myself, and made it personal, and made it certain. They tried to move Prince Joran. It was past midnight. I was not on post. I was awake, as I have said, lying in the guards' quarters listening to the palace breathe, when I heard a boy's voice in the colonnade outside, Joran's voice, pitched high and uncertain, saying, "But Mama said I'm to sleep in my own room." I was up and out the door in my shirt before I had decided to be. In the colonnade I found the Prince of Eldermoor in his night-clothes with a footman's hand on his shoulder. A footman I did not know. A thin-shouldered man steering the boy gently but firmly toward the service stair, away from the family wing, toward the lower floors, toward the cellars. "Highness," I said. The footman's hand came off the boy's shoulder so fast it might never have been there. "He was sleepwalking, guardsman," the man said smoothly. "Wandered out. I was returning him." "I wasn't sleepwalking," said Joran, with the offended dignity of a 10-year-old. And then he saw it was me and his whole face lit, because here at last was his great challenge, his guardsman who never laughed, and even at midnight in his night-clothes with a stranger's hand just lifted from his shoulder he could not help grinning. "Vael," Tell him I wasn't sleepwalking. The man said Mama wanted me in the green room, and I said Mama never said any such thing. The green room. There is no green room in the family wing. There is a green door at the bottom of the service stair, and beyond it the lower cellar. I took the Prince of Eldermoor by the hand, a thing a guardsman does not do, a thing I would have been disciplined for on any other night of my life, and I walked him back to his own bed past his own door, and I stood outside that door the rest of the night with my hand never far from where my sidearm would have been if I had been in uniform. The thin-shouldered footman was gone by the time I turned around. Of course he was, but I understood now what I had only feared before. They were not only after the Queen. They were willing to use her children to do it, to lure a boy down a stair, to hold a small hostage in the dark, to give themselves a key that no guard in the kingdom could refuse to turn. And whatever shape the thing took at the feast, I knew now it would not be a thing I could afford to be wrong about by even a single second. I went over Captain Rowe's head the next morning, which is a thing a guardsman may do exactly once in his career, and only if he is right, because if he is wrong it is the last morning of his career. I requested an audience with the Lord Chamberlain of Harrogate, a thin, elegant man named Sir Cedric Marlowe, who held the keys of the whole household and answered only to the Queen herself. I had no right to his time. I claimed it anyway, on the grounds that I had information bearing on the safety of the royal children, which is the one phrase that will open any door in that palace, and I stood in his beautiful cold study and laid it all before him. The new man, the green ribbon, Teague's fear, the footman in the colonnade trying to walk the prince down to the cellar door in the dark. Sir Cedric Marlowe listened to every word with his long pale hands folded on his desk, and his face arranged in an expression of grave attention, and when I had finished, he was silent for a long moment, and then he said the thing that made the floor tilt under me a second time. "Guardsman Vael," he said, "do you know what the Founder's Reserve is worth?" I said I did not. "It is beyond worth," he said. "It is the wine of the founding. The Queen will pour from it at the feast as her mother poured, and her mother's mother, 400 years unbroken. It is the single most precious object in this household after the crown itself, and it is in the keeping of Bran Teague, who has guarded it faithfully for 19 years, and whose family has guarded it for 200. And you come to me 3 days before the feast to tell me that Teague is a poisoner, on the strength of a child's chatter about a pony and your own dislike of a hired man's face." He let that sit. "I will tell you what I think, Vael. I think you are a good guardsman who has stood too many long posts and let his mind run. And I think if you carry this tale one step further, to the press, to the Queen, to anyone, you will not only end yourself, you will cast a shadow over the founding feast that the House of Harrogate cannot afford in front of the whole world. Do you understand me?" I understood him perfectly. I understood him better than he knew, because as he spoke the word Teague the third time, I had been watching his long pale hands on the desk, and at the word poisoner one of those hands had made a small movement, a smoothing of the blotter that did not need smoothing, the hand finding something to do because the rest of the body had gone too still. I had read that exact stillness once before in my life, 4 days earlier, on the thin man at the cellar door. And in that instant, the whole shape of the thing turned over in my mind like a card flipping, and I saw it from the other side. Bran Teague was not the poisoner. Bran Teague was the frightened man. The thin man with the green ribbon was not Teague's hire, he was Teague's keeper. And the elegant cold man behind this desk, who answered only to the Queen, who held the keys of the whole household and the trust of the realm, who had just spent 10 minutes teaching me with great patience why I must never speak of this to anyone. This man was not protecting the Founder's Reserve. He was the one who had poisoned it. I did not let my face change. 11 years of the wall held, the most important holding of my life. I thanked the Lord Chamberlain for his counsel. I told him he was surely right, that the long posts had got the better of me, that I was ashamed to have troubled him. I watched the relief move behind his eyes, the relief of a man who has talked a problem back into its box, and I bowed, and I left his study, and I walked the length of 3 corridors before I let myself stop and put my hand against the cold stone and breathe. Because now I knew, and knowing was worse than not knowing. The man at the top of the household, the man who controlled every guard rotation and every door key and the very flow of information to the Queen, wanted her dead at her own founding feast. There was no captain I could go to that he could not unmake. There was no report I could file that did not cross his desk. He had told me, in so many words, that to speak was to end myself, and he had the power to make that true within the hour. I had walked into the spider's parlor and announced that I could see the web, and the only reason I was still walking was that I had managed, in the last second, to convince the spider I was blind. I had 2 days. I had no allies I could trust above the rank of guardsman, and I had a single, terrible advantage, which was the one thing the Lord Chamberlain did not know I possessed. I knew exactly what he meant to do, and I knew the precise instant he meant to do it. He meant to do it at the toast. It had to be the toast. The Founder's Reserve, poured by the Queen's own steward into the Founder's cup, raised by the Queen's own hand in front of 10 million watching souls, there could be no more perfect murder. No one would dream the wine was the weapon. The wine was sacred. The wine was 400 years of unbroken trust. When the Queen fell, the realm would not cry poison. It would cry grief, and then it would cry omen, and a kingdom that believes its founding wine has struck down its queen is a kingdom ready to be told that the house of Harrogate has lost the favor of whatever it is kings believe in. I did not yet know who Sir Cedric Marlowe meant to put on the empty throne, or what he had been promised, or by whom. But I knew the cup, and I knew the moment, and I knew that whatever happened, it would come down at last to me, to a single guardsman 2 paces behind the Queen's right shoulder, with 1/2 second between seeing and knowing, exactly as Sergeant Maddox had bellowed at me across a frozen drill yard 15 years before. The whole of my life, I understood, had been the drill. The feast would be the live round. A wiser man than I am would have run to the Queen that very hour, thrown himself at her feet, and told her everything. I thought about it. I lay awake the whole of that night thinking about it. And I did not do it, and I want to be honest about why, because it is the hinge on which everything turned, and I have examined it 10,000 times since. If I went to the Queen and she believed me, the Lord Chamberlain would know within the hour, for the Queen would summon her household to act, and her household was his. He would simply move the poison to another hour, another cup, another year, and the thin man with the green ribbon would melt back into the kingdom and wait, and the next time there might be no guardsman who noticed. And if I went to the Queen and she did not believe me, if she heard a guardsman accuse her own Lord Chamberlain, the man her late mother had trusted above all others, on the strength of a card flipping in his mind, then I would be removed from her side that night, disgraced or worse, and she would walk to the feast 2 days later with no one at her back who knew. Either way, I lost the one thing I had, the element of being thought blind. The spider had to believe, right up to the final second, that the web was invisible to me. The only place I could win was at the cup itself, in the half-second when the poison was in the open and the murder was already in motion, and there was no longer any other hour for him to retreat to. So I made a different plan, and it was a guardsman's plan, which is to say it was made of patience and noticing and almost nothing else. I needed to know how. I knew the cup in the moment, but I did not know how the poison would get into the Founder's Reserve, or whether it was in the wine already or would go in at the table, because the answer to that question was the answer to where I had to be looking and what sign I had to catch. A poisoned cask serves a poisoner badly. Too many hands touch it, too many chances of the wrong mouth tasting first. I came to believe it would not be the cask. It would be the cup or the pour. Something done at the table, in the open, swift and small, in the one unguarded instant when 600 pairs of eyes were lifted to the Queen's face and not to the wine. And to catch a thing done in an instant, you must know in advance precisely where to look, because the eye that searches everywhere sees nothing, and the eye that knows where the wrongness will be can catch it in a half-second. That is the whole of a guardsman's craft. Not strength, not speed, knowing where to look before the moment comes. I went back in my mind over every founding feast I had ever guarded, 6 of them, and I built the pour in my memory step by step. The steward carries the cup to the queen's right hand. The steward fills it from the founder's reserve. The queen lifts it, speaks the founding words, drinks. Where in that sequence is the instant of no eyes? It is the pour. When Teague tips the dark wine into the cup, every face in the hall watches the wine, the sacred wine, the 400 years of it catching the candlelight, and no one watches the steward's other hand. The other hand, that was where I would have to look, not at the cup, not at the queen, not at the wine. At Brannon Teague's left hand in the 2 seconds of the pour, while the whole world stared at his right. But I am only one set of eyes, and I would be 2 paces behind the queen, half turned away, with the pour happening in front of her where I could not see Teague's hands at all. And here the plan should have died, except that I was not, in the end, entirely without allies. I had 2. They were 8 and 10 years old, and they had given me everything I needed without either of us ever saying the word poison aloud. I went to Princess Malin the next morning on the family post, when she came out to the gallery as she always did. I crouched down to her height, which a guardsman must never do, and I told her I needed her help with something secret and important, more secret even than Sugar the pony. Her gray eyes went wide and solemn. I told her that at the great feast she would be seated near her mother, and that I needed her to do one small thing and tell no one, not even Joran. When Mr. Teague poured Mama's special wine, she was to watch his hands, both his hands, and if either hand did anything strange, anything at all that did not belong to pouring, she was to do the thing we had practiced. "What thing?" she whispered. I taught her the signal. It was the simplest thing in the world. If she saw a wrongness, she was to reach up and touch the little silver horse I had bought her that morning in the market with my own coin and pinned to her collar, Sugar, made small in silver, a gift from her guardsman. Touch the horse. That was all. A child reaching up to touch a pretty thing at her throat, the most invisible gesture in any hall in the world. No man watching for danger would ever read it, but I would. I would be watching that small silver horse the way I have watched every important thing in my life, with the whole of my noticing, and if her hand went to it, I would already be moving. I want you to understand what I did there, and I want you to judge me for it honestly, because the Queen later judged me for it, and I have never decided whether her judgment was the right one. I used a child. I put an 8-year-old between her mother and a poisoner. I told myself she was only to watch and touch a charm, that there was no danger to her in it, that the danger was all the Queen's, and that was true. And it was also a guardsman finding a reason for a thing he had already decided to do, because he had no other set of eyes on that pour. I have stood many cold posts paying for that decision in my own mind, but I will tell you the rest of it now, and you may weigh it as you like.